놈들을 죽이기보다는 일단은 생각.
At the end of the 16th century, the Joseon Kingdom was ruled by a tyrant, King Seonjo, a ruler who despised equality between nobles and slaves. Yet in the distant land of Daidonghai, the people dared to dream differently. They formed a secret organization, a brotherhood built on equality. To the king, they were traitors. And so, the royal army was sent to erase them, every last one. The story begins with a boy, Cheon Yong, torn from his home and forced into slavery. Royal guards came to take him away, while his father, powerless and broken, could only watch. As his son was dragged to serve under the Minister of Defense's family. There, hundreds of slaves toiled under cruel hierarchies, each assigned their role in silent obedience. Cheon Yong's fate was perhaps the cruelest of them all. He was chosen to take the punishment meant for the minister's only son, Yi Jong-ryo. Whenever Ryo made mistakes during training, it was Cheon's body that received the strikes. For a child his age, the pain was unbearable. Yet he endured, silently questioning why fate had cursed him so. Ryo tried to befriend Cheon, but Cheon rejected him, resentful, desperate for freedom. He ran away, only to return home and find his father's body hanging lifeless behind the house. Moments later, the guards captured him and dragged him back. Back to the mansion, back to the pain, back to being the beating post for Jong-ryo's mistakes. That night, however, something changed. Cheon offered to teach Ryo sword techniques, moves he had secretly learned by watching Ryo's instructor. Under the moonlight, the two trained in silence, and for the first time, Ryo's strikes found precision. Unbeknownst to them, Ryo's father was watching. From that night onward, the boy's skills began to grow rapidly, faster than anyone expected. The next morning, Jong-ryo approached Cheon with a message. His father had ordered that Cheon would now become his official instructor. Overwhelmed with emotion, tears streamed down Cheon's face as he broke every branch once used to whip him. His first small taste of dignity after years of pain. Years passed. The two boys, once bound by pain, had grown into men. Brothers forged by blood, sweat, and steel. Through years of training, Cheon Yong had become a formidable swordsman, faster, stronger, more disciplined than any warrior of his rank. Jong-ryo, however, remained ordinary, a noble born to privilege, not forged by suffering. Then came the time for Jong-ryo to join the royal army. But every test ended in failure, drawing the wrath of his father. Seeing Ryo's humiliation, Cheon stepped forward and made a bold request. To take the military exam in Ryo's place, he swore he would emerge as the champion, but only if he were granted his freedom in return. Jong-ryo's father agreed. When the examinations ended, the results were astounding. Cheon had not only passed, he had become the top warrior. As a reward, he was given a sacred sword, Iosawa, engraved with the name Yi Jong-ryo, and a blue robe symbolizing strength and honor. Cheon prepared to leave, to finally live as a free man. Jong-ryo pleaded with his father to keep his promise, but the man broke his word. Their confrontation turned violent, rage and betrayal tearing through the family's walls. Jong-ryo rushed to warn Cheon. When he told him about the betrayal, Cheon's heart filled with fury and sorrow. Overcome with guilt, Ryo urged him to flee, to disappear far away before the royal enforcer, Guan Yi, the ruthless slave hunter, could find him. Years later, fate caught up with Cheon. He was captured by Guan Yi and dragged back before the minister's family. Burning with anger, Cheon spoke out, demanding justice for his loyalty and sacrifice, only to be met with scorn. In fear that Cheon might reveal the truth about the military exam, Ryo's father drew his sword to silence him forever. But Cheon, unflinching, bit the edge of the blade and demanded execution. A warrior's death for a man denied his dignity. Only Jong-ryo's desperate pleas spared his life. But Cheon's heart had turned cold. Consumed by rage, he begged to be killed rather than live as a broken man. Ryo refused, and in a fit of despair, Cheon threatened to slaughter Ryo's entire family and burn their estate to ashes. Terrified, Ryo slashed Cheon's hand, crippling him, ensuring he could never wield a sword again. At that same moment, the Japanese invasion of Joseon had begun. King Seonjo, weak and selfish, abandoned his capital, fleeing north to build a new palace, leaving his people to die. Jong Ryo, now a decorated officer, was assigned to escort the fleeing king, while his family prepared to follow in secret. But when Ryo returned home to retrieve his sword, it was gone. He suspected Cheon, but found him unconscious, still bound and beaten. With no time to waste, Ryo departed unarmed. Moments later, chaos erupted. The true thief was another slave, one who could no longer bear the cruelty. The slaves rose up in rebellion, slaughtering the entire household. Jong Ryo's parents were among the dead. Amid the flames, Cheon awoke. At the end of the 16th century, the Joseon Kingdom was ruled by a tyrant, King Seonjo, a ruler who despised equality between nobles and slaves. He fled the inferno, only to find Ryo's wife and child trapped in the blaze. Ryo's wife looked at him with hatred, saying the curse he'd spoken had come true. Cheon tried to save them, but she chose to burn rather than be saved by a slave. Moments later, Guanyi arrived, only to see Cheon galloping away on horseback. Convinced that Cheon was the instigator, Guanyi vowed vengeance. The rebellion spread, from villages to provinces, until even the royal palace trembled. Far away, King Seonjo's caravan came to a halt. From the distance, they saw Gyeonbok Palace engulfed in fire. And the king learned the terrible truth. The flames were not from Japanese invaders, but from his own people rising against him. Among the chaos, a royal strategist noticed Cheon, the blue robe, the warrior's blade, the calm in his eyes. Believing him to be a skilled officer, he approached and said, "Join us, help rally Joseon's people to fight the invaders." He promised freedom for any slave who took up arms. And so, a new army began to form, led by a strategist, joined by rebels, commoners, and wanderers alike. A young slingshot prodigy, and a butcher. Not long after, the Japanese forces led by Commander Genshin Kikuwa arrived in a small Joseon village, spreading terror like wildfire. Among the villagers was a fortune teller, a woman whose defiance could not be silenced. As the soldiers dragged her away, she spat out a curse. "You will die, Genshin, by your own blade, through your throat." Genshin laughed, moments before burning the entire village to the ground. Then he marched toward the Joseon capital. Meanwhile, King Seonjo waited by the river, preparing to flee the kingdom he'd abandoned. But the people had seen enough. Their king's cowardice, they rose in rebellion. Peasants and soldiers turning against their own monarch. Jong Ryo, sworn to protect the king, was forced to strike down his own countrymen. Joseon blood spilled by Joseon hands. Then came Guanyi, the relentless slave hunter. He reported the horrors that had unfolded. The Jong family mansion burned to ashes, every family member slaughtered, and Cheon Yong seen fleeing on horseback, wearing his blue warrior robe. Rage consumed Jong Ryo. Blinded by vengeance, he massacred the innocent, his sword cutting through the very people he once vowed to defend. And amidst the chaos, King Seonjo and his ministers escaped by boat. On the other side of the battlefield, Cheon Yong rallied the freed slaves to stand against the Japanese invaders. But their weapons were no match for the enemy's guns and cannons. Bodies fell one after another, the ground soaked with the blood of men who had nothing left to lose. Then Cheon saw an opening. He ordered his fighters to circle behind the enemy while they reloaded. The maneuver worked. Chaos rippled through the Japanese ranks, and Joseon's warriors regained their spirit. With his blade gleaming under the smoke-filled sky, Cheon tore through the enemy lines, cutting his way to the front where Commander Genshin Kikuwa awaited.
Okay.
Steel clashed against steel. Their duel echoed across the valley, two masters bound by destiny. Genshin, impressed by Cheon's technique, declared, "You fight like no slave I've ever seen." But exhaustion overcame Cheon. His footing slipped, and he plunged into the abyss below.
그러느라 고생들 많았네.
7 years passed. The war with Japan finally ended. The invaders defeated. But Joseon lay in ruins. The once great capital was now a ghost city, famine and death lingering in every corner. Some had even turned to eating the dead to survive. Cheon Yong now lived in a refugee camp among fellow warriors, men and women who had given everything for their homeland. Among them were Bom Dong, a fierce woman who fought with a wooden staff, and General Kim alongside the royal strategist who once believed in Cheon's strength. One night, the freed slaves gathered before General Kim, asking when the king would grant them the freedom they were promised. The general assured them he would soon meet the king and demand it himself. But back in the capital, King Seonjo had returned, not to reward his people, but to rebuild his palace. Even as his advisors begged him to aid the starving and honor the fallen, the king remained blinded by pride and vanity. Meanwhile, word spread of a man known only as the Blue-Clad God of the Sword, the hero who led Joseon soldiers to countless victories. That man was Cheon Yong, and now he stood once again face to face with his destiny, and with Genshin Kikawa, the very man who once brought ruin to his homeland.
인도를 죽이기보다는 일단은
On their journey back to camp, Cheon Yong and the others witnessed a scene that tore their hearts apart. Starving villagers begging for food outside the city walls. While beyond those same walls, Mayor Jong-jun held a lavish banquet filled with laughter and fine dishes. Bom Dong could no longer stand it. General Kim promised to report the mayor's cruelty and have him removed from office. But that wasn't enough for Bom Dong. She decided to deliver justice in her own way. General Kim soon planned to escort the captured Japanese officers to the palace, hoping to negotiate the freedom of the warrior slaves who had fought for Joseon. Cheon Yong volunteered to guard him on the journey. When they arrived in the capital, the people of Joseon celebrated General Kim as a hero, the man who had driven out the invaders. But from a balcony above, Jong Ryo, now serving the king, spotted Cheon among the crowd. Memories of his murdered family flashed before his eyes, and his heart filled with vengeance. Whispering venom into the king's ear, Jong Ryo accused General Kim of treason, claiming he had conspired with the rebels. Then came another blow. A royal messenger arrived with news that Mayor Jong-jun had been killed, supposedly by followers of General Kim. The verdict was swift. General Kim and his men were arrested and executed. Cheon barely escaped alive, forced to watch as the severed heads of his comrades hung in the streets, labeled traitors to the crown. That night, as Jong Ryo returned home, he found his guards slaughtered and his courtyard drenched in blood. Standing in the shadows was Cheon Yong, waiting, their destinies finally colliding. Once brothers, now enemies, each fighting for his own truth. Cheon believed Jong Ryo had betrayed Joseon by serving the tyrant King Seonjo, while Jong Ryo burned with hatred, convinced Cheon had murdered his family. In the heat of the duel, Guan Yi appeared, rushing to aid Jong Ryo, but Cheon moved like lightning. He severed Guan Yi's arm, then ended his life without a word. Before the fight could finish, the royal guards stormed in, forcing Cheon to flee into the darkness. After General Kim's death, chaos engulfed the kingdom. The people rose in anger, revolting against their corrupt ruler. The king, furious over the unrest, blamed Jong Ryo for suggesting the execution. To regain the king's favor, Jong Ryo presented a relic, a treasure seized from the Japanese. He claimed there were more hidden riches buried by the enemy, and offered to lead a special expedition using Japanese prisoners as diggers. The royal ministers objected, but as always, the king's word was absolute, like a god's decree. Meanwhile, Cheon returned to the camp, carrying with him the severed heads of his fallen brothers, his only proof of loyalty. Bom Dong, furious that Cheon had disobeyed her warning not to meet the king, lashed out in anger. But Cheon's resolve was unshaken. He reignited the fire of rebellion. Together, he and Bomdong rallied the remaining soldiers, swearing to overthrow King Seonjo himself. To fund their uprising, they planned to seize the Japanese treasure said to be buried nearby. They found it chests overflowing with gold and artifacts. But before they could celebrate, the royal strategist betrayed them, capturing both Cheon and Bomdong. Tempted by greed, the strategist convinced the others to abandon Cheon and flee with the treasure, believing wealth mattered more than justice. As they dragged the chests away, Si Bongsu, the young slingshot warrior, felt guilt consuming his heart. Unable to bear the betrayal, he turned back to rescue Cheon and Bomdong. Meanwhile, the strategist and his followers were ambushed mid-journey, slaughtered by Japanese soldiers in Jong Ryo's army, who had joined forces for their own gain. From a distance, Si Bongsu witnessed the massacre and ran to warn Cheon and Bomdong. At dawn, Jong Ryo ordered his combined Joseon Japanese forces to transport the treasure to the coast, where a royal ship awaited. But deep down, Jong Ryo had his own plan: to eliminate his Japanese allies and claim everything for himself. When he gave the signal and fired their stolen muskets, the guns exploded. Sabotaged by the Japanese long beforehand, panic erupted. Swords were drawn and battle erupted between the two armies. Amidst the bloodshed, Genshin Kikawa donned his old samurai armor from one of the treasure chests, his eyes burning with vengeance. When the smoke cleared, only two warriors remained standing: Jong Ryo and Genshin. Their swords met once more, sparks flying with every strike. Until a shadow appeared behind them. Cheon Yong. Now, the three of them, once bound by fate, now consumed by rage, clashed in a brutal three-way duel that would decide the future of Joseon. Meanwhile, Bomdong and Si Bongsu fought on the outskirts, annihilating the last of the Japanese soldiers. As the battlefield burned behind them. As the battle raged on, Jong Ryo finally shouted the truth buried deep within his heart. Through clenched teeth and trembling rage, he revealed the reason behind his hatred. He believed it was Cheon Yong who had burned his home and killed his family. Cheon froze. His eyes widened in disbelief. Then, with a voice heavy with sorrow, he explained he had tried to save Jong Ryo's wife that night, but she had called him a beast, refusing his hand and choosing death in the flames instead. Realization struck Jong Ryo like lightning. All these years, he had hated the wrong man. Before he could speak again, Genshin Kikawa lunged from behind, driving his blade deep into Cheon's back. Jong Ryo, wounded but still standing, threw himself between them and fought with everything he had left. Seeing his friend fall, Cheon roared with fury. He rose one last time, clutching his sword with bloodied hands. Their duel became a storm of steel and vengeance, until, with a final strike, Cheon severed Genshin's arms and turned his own sword against him, ending the commander's life exactly as the prophecy had foretold. Meanwhile, in the royal palace, King Seonjo, ever arrogant and blind to the suffering of his people, busied himself with the reconstruction of his grand palace. Then came a messenger. A ship had just arrived at the harbor, carrying treasure from the battlefield. Overjoyed, the king rushed to the docks. He pried open the first chest and froze in horror. Inside, instead of gold, lay hundreds of severed human noses, preserved in salt. A gruesome reminder of the price of his greed. In the town square, a crowd gathered around a small street performance. It was Bomdong, keeping the spirit of the fallen alive through her stories. Moments later, Cheon Yong appeared, his body weary but his eyes burning with purpose. The two stood side by side once more, watching the people of Joseon rise from the ashes. There, beneath the fading light, they made a vow to form a new alliance, to fight for justice, and to bring down the tyrant who had destroyed their land. Not just a warrior's story, but a legend of courage, loyalty, and redemption. A man who chose truth over power and compassion over vengeance. For even in the darkest of times, a single blade can shine brighter than 1,000 torches. See you in the next video. I'm Allie, sign off. Don't forget to take a bath, and goodbye.
Anxiety, filling up every space, no privacy. And silently, it could build and build until you finally see. Whoa, it's taking over, damn, no closure, moving closer. No exposure, I just wanna be a loner. Some can't stay sober.